The air in Donovan's draft was thick with the ghosts of better days. It was a smell Leo Donovan knew better than his own skin. A complex bouquet of stale beer, damp brick, and the faint, sweet perfume of spilled whiskey that had seeped into the mahogany bar over 90 years. It was the smell of history, his sister Sarah called it. To Leo, it just smelled like failure. He ran a damp cloth over the bar, the motion automatic, his eyes fixed on the television mounted in the corner. A slick, high-budget commercial was playing. Sun-drenched, impossibly beautiful people laughed on a rooftop, clinking elegantly frosted bottles of Aura lager. The tagline, delivered by a voice as smooth as polished granite, washed over the empty brewery. Aura. The gold standard. Leo snorted, the sound swallowed by the cavernous silence. The gold standard. It was water dressed up in a billion-dollar marketing campaign. Soulless, flavorless corporate swill. And it was everywhere. It was the beer that had systematically crushed small, independent breweries like his across the country. Global Beverage Corp, the behemoth behind Aura, didn't just make beer, they waged war with it. "You're going to wear a hole in the bar, Leo," Sarah's voice cut through his reverie. She was standing by the office door, a stack of mail in her hand, her expression a familiar cocktail of pity and impatience. Where Leo was all soft edges and a perpetually worried brow, Sarah was sharp angles and sharper pragmatism. She had their father's head for numbers, while Leo had inherited their great-grandfather's heart for hops. It was not, he had learned, an equitable trade. "Just admiring the competition," he mumbled, flipping the cloth over. "Admiring them, they're eating us alive." She slapped the mail down on the bar. The top envelope had a red stamped "past due" glaring up at him. "The grain supplier is threatening to cut us off. The electricity bill is a joke. We're 2 months from foreclosure, maybe less. We'll get a loan." "A small business grant," Leo said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He said them 100 times. "No one gives loans to a sinking ship," Sarah countered, her voice softening slightly. "A Leo, Mr. Henderson from Sterling Realty called again. His client is still interested. They're offering more than the property is worth. Enough to pay off our debts and walk away with something in our pockets." A fresh start, the words "walk away" felt like a physical blow. Walk away from the brewery Arthur Donovan had built with his own hands in 1933, the year Prohibition died. Walk away from the copper kettle his grandfather had polished every single day, from the bar where his own father had taught him to pour the perfect pint. "It's not just a property, Sarah. It's our name. Our name is going to be plastered on a foreclosure notice," she snapped, her frustration boiling over. "I'm tired of watching you kill yourself for a ghost, Leo. Dad ran this place into the ground chasing the same dream. It's time to be realistic." He had no answer for that. And she was right, of course. The brewery was a financial black hole, a monument to a bygone era. The craft beer scene had exploded, but they were stuck in the past. A dusty relic that couldn't compete with the trendy microbreweries downtown or the corporate sledgehammer that was Aura. He felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the crushing burden of being the Donovan who finally let the legacy die. He looked around the empty room, at the faded photographs on the wall of his great-grandfather, his grandfather, his father, all of them standing proudly in this very spot. Their smiling faces felt like an accusation. The decision was born of desperation. The walk-in cooler was on the fritz again, and the repairman wanted $500 Leo didn't have. He remembered his father muttering about spare parts, old equipment stored away for a rainy day. Well, it was a monsoon. The door to the attic was at the back of the brewery, up a rickety set of stairs. It groaned in protest as he forced it open, releasing a dusty, musty breath that smelled of ancient paper and dormant wood. A single bare bulb cast a weak circle of light, illuminating a graveyard of brewing history. There were stacks of old wooden kegs branded with the original Donovan's draft logo. A hand-cranked bottling machine from the 40s sat under a canvas shroud, looking like a medieval torture device. He spent an hour rummaging, finding nothing but rusted parts and decaying hoses. The place was a testament to his family's defining trait: they never threw anything away. Defeated, he was about to leave when his foot caught on the corner of a heavy wooden trunk tucked away under the eaves. It was an old steamer trunk, bound with leather straps that had long since rotted. The initials A.D. were embossed in faded gold on the lids. Arthur Donovan. His great-grandfather. Curiosity piqued, he dragged the trunk into the center of the room. The latches were rusted solid. He went back downstairs for a crowbar, the effort of prying the lid open sending a shower of rust and dust into the air. The trunk opened with a final mournful creak. The inside was meticulously packed. On top lay a thick leather-bound journal. Beneath it were stacks of brewing logs, their pages filled with elegant looping cursive. And at the very bottom, nestled in yellowed cheesecloth, was a simple wooden frame. Leo lifted it out. The bulb overhead cast a dim light on the glass. It was an official document adorned with an eagle seal. The words at the top were bold and clear, the United States of America. United States Patent Office. His breath caught in his throat. He read the details, his fingers tracing the raised print. The patent was for a unique method and composition for the brewing of lager beer. It had been granted to Arthur Donovan. The date was February 6, 1934. Leo carried the frame and the journal downstairs as if they were holy relics. He sat at the bar, the single lamp behind it casting a pool of light in the otherwise dark brewery. He wiped the dust from the glass of the frame. U.S. Patent 1,945,678. It was real. He opened the journal. The first entry was dated December 5, 1933, the day Prohibition was repealed. A new era dawns, Arthur had written. The failed experiment is over. A man can once again enjoy a proper beer without skulking in the shadows. But the market will be fierce. The big breweries from Milwaukee and St. Louis survived, and they have the capital to dominate. A small man needs an edge. Something special. Leo turned the pages, mesmerized. His great-grandfather's voice, silent for half a century, spoke to him from the ink. He wrote of his experiments, his quest for a lager that was both crisp and full-bodied, light in color but rich in flavor. A beer for the working man, but with a quality that a connoisseur would appreciate. Then he found the section detailing the recipe for the patent. Arthur called it his Golden Anchor Lager. The description was poetic. A precise balance of Pilsener malt and flaked corn for a clean, light body, with a subtle undertone of Vienna malt for a hint of biscuit. The true secret lies in the hopping. A delicate blend of German Hallertau and a new, experimental American hop called Cluster, added at 3 distinct stages of the boil to create a floral aroma without overwhelming bitterness. He described the unique mashing process, a stepped infusion method that was time-consuming but crucial for extracting the exact sugars needed for its signature clean finish. It was all there, temperatures, timings, ingredients, all recorded in meticulous detail. It was a brewer's masterpiece. A cold dread began to creep up Leo's spine. A subtle undertone of biscuit. A delicate floral aroma. A signature clean finish. The description felt unnervingly familiar. It sounded exactly like the marketing copy for Aura. His hands trembled as he locked up the brewery. He drove to the all-night convenience store, the fluorescent lights inside humming with an alien buzz. He walked to the beer cooler, a wall of glass and steel dominated by the ubiquitous blue and gold packaging of Aura. He bought a six-pack, the bottles feeling cold and heavy in his hand, like evidence of a crime. Back at the brewery, he sat at the bar, his great-grandfather's journal open next to him. He twisted the cap off an Aura and poured it into a clean pint glass. He held it up to the light. Pale gold, brilliantly clear. He swirled it, watching the tight, white head form. The aroma hit him first, a faint floral scent. Hallertau hops, he thought instantly. He took a sip. The world seemed to slow down. The taste was clean, crisp, exactly as advertised. But underneath the initial impression, it was all there. The slight cracker-like sweetness of the malt, the whisper of floral hops that didn't linger, the impossibly smooth finish. It was his great-grandfather's Golden Anchor Lager. He frantically flipped through the journal, his heart hammering against his ribs. He cross-referenced the technical specifications of Aura that were publicly available online, its ABV, its IBU, its grain bill, which was vaguely listed as a blend of two-row barley and corn. It all matched. The pieces didn't just fit, they locked together with a sickening definitive click. Global Beverage Corp. hadn't just created a similar beer. They had stolen his family's recipe. The billion-dollar brand that was driving him out of business, the beer he despised with every fiber of his being, was his own legacy, twisted and repackaged and sold back to him. The bitterness in his mouth had nothing to do with the hops. He waited until morning, pacing the brewery floor all night, a storm of rage and a strange, terrifying hope brewing inside him. When Sarah arrived, her face already set in a grim, businesslike mask. He couldn't hold it in. "They stole it," he said, his voice raw. He had the journal and the patent laid out on the bar like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "A global beverage. Laura. It's great-grandpa Arthur's recipe." Sarah stopped, setting her purse down slowly. She looked at the display, then at Leo's wild eyes. She sighed a long, weary sound. "Leo, what is this?" "It's proof. I found it in the attic." His journal, his logs, and this. He tapped the glass of the patent frame. He patented his Golden Anchor lager in 1934. It's the exact recipe for Aura. I tasted it. I checked the specs. It's a perfect match. She picked up the patent, her brow furrowed in concentration. She read it, then put it down and opened the journals. For a moment, Leo thought he saw a flicker of something in her eyes, wonder maybe. But then she shook her head and the pragmatic mask slipped back into place. "Leo, this is from 1934. A patent is only good for, 17 years? It expired before we were even born." "That's not the point," he insisted, his voice rising. They stole it. They're making billions off of our family's work. This is our legacy, Sarah, and they're printing money with it." "And how exactly do you plan to prove that?" she asked, her tone maddeningly calm. "How do you prove that a massive corporation, 50 years after this patent expired, somehow got their hands on a recipe from a dusty journal in our attic? Do you think they sent a team of corporate ninjas to steal it?" The argument escalated quickly. Leo, fueled by righteous fury, accused her of having no soul, no respect for their family. Sarah, grounded in the brutal reality of their finances, accused him of chasing fantasies, of looking for a magic bullet to solve the problems his own mismanagement had created. "This is a lottery ticket, Leo, a fairy tale," she finally yelled, her hands clenched into fists. "We are drowning, and you're up here talking about corporate ninjas and secret recipes. Henderson's offer is real. It's on the table right now. Please, for the love of God, let's just take the money and get out before we lose everything." She stormed into the office, slamming the door behind her. Leo stood alone in the brewery, the silence ringing in his ears. The fight wasn't just against some faceless corporation anymore. It was against the doubt in his own family, the doubt that echoed the deepest insecurities in his own heart. The sting of Sarah's words lingered for days. He was a fool. He was chasing a ghost. But every time he looked at the patent, at his great-grandfather's confident script, a stubborn fire rekindled within him. He spent his nights online, falling down a rabbit hole of intellectual property law, patent infringement, and trade secret misappropriation. The more he read, the more he realized Sarah was right about one thing: he was completely out of his depths. A patent from 1934 was legally worthless. But the recipe itself, if it had been kept secret and was then stolen, that could be a different story. A trade secret. He needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone who understood this kind of fight. He couldn't afford a big downtown firm. He needed a giant killer. The name came from an unlikely source. Mr. Hasek, the old butcher from down the street, would come in for a pint every Thursday. Leo, serving him his usual stout, vented his frustration. "You need a fighter," Hasek said, wiping foam from his mustache. "You need a leaner Vance. She retired mostly, but she never could stand a bully. My cousin, he had a problem with a big developer trying to take his land. A leaner tied them up in knots for 2 years. They ended up paying him 3 times what they offered." The name echoed in Leo's mind. A leaner Vance. He'd heard of her. A local legend, a brilliant but notoriously cantankerous lawyer who had taken on corporations and City Hall for decades, often for clients who couldn't pay. He found her office listed in an old phone book. It wasn't a firm, it was just E. Vance, attorney at law. The address was above a second-hand bookstore on a forgotten side street. It was a long shot, but it was the only one he had. The stairs to a leaner Vance's office creaked like a haunted house. The office itself was a single, cluttered room smelling of old books and brewing tea. Books were piled on every surface, legal texts interspersed with novels and poetry. Behind a mountain of a desk sat a woman who looked to be in her early 70s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a cascade of silver hair pinned up haphazardly. Don't just stand there gawking, you're letting the heat out, she said without looking up from the brief she was reading. What do you want? Leo, intimidated, stammered his way through his story, laying the journal and the framed patent on her desk. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she peered at the patent over the top of her reading glasses. 1934, she said flatly. It's a historical document. Worth about as much as the paper it's printed on. Legally speaking, but the recipe is a list of ingredients and a method, she cut in, her voice sharp as broken glass. Young man, do you have any idea what you're suggesting? You want to sue Global Beverage Corp. They don't have a legal team, they have an army. They will bury you. They will file motions until you're bankrupt, they will depose everyone you've ever known, they will make your life a living hell, and they will enjoy it. Leo's shoulders slumped. So you won't help me? I didn't say that, she said, leaning back in her chair, which squeaked in protest. She picked up the journal, her long, elegant fingers turning the fragile pages with surprising delicacy. She read a few passages aloud, her voice softening. A beer for the working man, but with a quality a connoisseur would appreciate. Your great-grandfather was a romantic. She was silent for a long time, her gaze distant. Leo could see her mind at work, connecting dots, assessing angles. It's not a patent case, she said finally, more to herself than to him. It's a trade secret case. The patent is just the proof of origin. The key is proving the recipe was secret, that it had value because it was secret, and that they took it through improper means. She looked at him, her eyes narrowed. This will be a bloody bare-knuckle brawl. And our chances are, to be generous, slim to none. Are you prepared for that? A spark ignited in Leo's chest. Yes, he said, his voice firm. I am. A slow smile spread across Aliner's face. Good, she said. I do so love a good fight. The first shot was a letter. Aliner drafted a formal cease and desist notice, a masterpiece of polite, menacing legalese. It detailed Arthur Donovan's patent, the confidential nature of his journal and brewing logs, the uncanny similarity of aura, and demanded that Global Beverage immediately halt production and enter into settlement negotiations. They sent it via registered mail, a crisp, white declaration of war. Leo felt a surge of adrenaline. They had acted. The ball was in GBC's court. He imagined hushed, panicked meetings in a gleaming corporate boardroom. The response, when it came a week later, was a bucket of ice water. It wasn't from the general counsel or a senior partner. It was a 2-paragraph form letter from a junior associate in their legal department. It was arrogant, dismissive, and insulting. Dear MS. Vance, it read. We are in receipt of your letter on behalf of Mr. Leo Donovan. Global Beverage Corp. Developed the formula for its Aura brand internally through years of dedicated research and development. Any similarity to any other product, past or present, is purely coincidental. We consider this matter closed. Please be advised that any further frivolous legal action will be met with a vigorous response, including a suit for malicious prosecution. It was a corporate middle finger. They hadn't even taken it seriously. They had passed it down to an intern to tell them to get lost. Leo was deflated, but Aliner was energized. She held the letter up, a grim smile on her face. This is perfect, she said. Arrogance. Nothing makes a corporation more vulnerable than its own arrogance. They're not scared. They're not even paying attention. They're swatting at a fly, so what now? Leo asked. Aliner's smile widened. Now, she said, reaching for a fresh legal pad. We sue them. Filing the lawsuit required money they didn't have. Court fees, filing fees, expert consultations. It added up to a figure that made Leo's stomach clench. There was only one asset they had left to leverage, the brewery itself. When he told Sarah he was taking out a second mortgage on the property to fund the lawsuit, the ensuing argument was the worst of his life. It wasn't loud or shouting, but a quiet Cold War waged in the brewery office. You are betting our home, our entire family history, on a lottery ticket from a lawyer who hasn't been in a real courtroom in a decade, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. It's not a lottery ticket. It's what's right, he countered, though his own conviction was wavering under the weight of her fear. What's right is protecting what we have left. In the end, he did it anyway. His signature on the loan documents felt like a point of no return. He had pushed all his chips into the center of the table. The day they filed the lawsuit was gray and overcast. Leo stood with a leaner on the steps of the county courthouse, a thick stack of papers in his briefcase. He felt small and insignificant against the cold, granite columns of the building. He was officially at war with a company whose annual revenue was larger than the GDP of a small country. He was terrified. Second thoughts, Eleanor asked, her gaze fixed on the courthouse doors. A few hundred, he admitted. She turned to him, her expression serious. Remember this feeling, Leo. They are counting on this fear to make you quit. They will push you until you break. Your only job is to not break. He nodded, taking a deep breath that did little to calm his racing heart. He looked at the courthouse, then back at Eleanor's determined face. He thought of his great-grandfather's journal, of the corporate arrogance in that dismissal letter, of Sarah's terrified eyes. He had made his choice. He had stepped across the line. There was no going back now. Let's go, he said, and together they walked up the steps and into the belly of the beast. The news of the lawsuit broke in a small article buried in the business section of the local paper. Local brewery sues beverage giant over beer recipe. Leo had expected a bigger splash, but it was a minor blip on the corporate radar. That is, until Chloe Martinez got a hold of it. Chloe was a young, hungry journalist for an online news outlet, always looking for a story with legs. A David and Goliath legal battle between a struggling family brewery and a multinational corporation was more than just a story. It was a narrative. She met Leo at the brewery, her notebook out, her questions sharp and insightful. She saw the history, the passion in Leo's eyes, and the patent hanging behind the bar. She saw the injustice. Her article, titled "The Ghost in the Machine, Did a Mega-Brewery Steal Its Billion-Dollar Beer from a 1934 Patent?" went viral. Suddenly, Leo's phone was ringing off the hook. The lawsuit was no longer a secret. It was a cause. Global Beverage Corp. responded with predictable force. Their legal team was headed by Jessica Harding, a lawyer with a reputation for being as brilliant as she was ruthless. Their first move was a motion to dismiss, arguing that the claim was baseless, barred by the statute of limitations, and a transparent attempt to extort money. The first hearing was a blur of intimidation for Leo. The courtroom was grand and imposing. Jessica Harding was a whirlwind of polished confidence and razor-sharp legal arguments, flanked by a team of junior lawyers. She painted Leo as a failure, a man running his family business into the ground who had conveniently discovered a document he hoped would be his salvation. Eleanor, however, was in her element. She stood alone, her voice calm and steady, dismantling Harding's arguments one by one. She wasn't arguing the facts of the case yet, merely the right for it to be heard. "My client is not asking for a handout, Your Honor," she concluded, her voice ringing with conviction. "He is asking for his day in court. He is asking for the chance to prove that the heart of his family's legacy is currently being sold in every gas station and grocery store in this country." The judge, a stern man with a skeptical expression, listened intently. In the end, he denied the motion to dismiss. "The plaintiff's claims are on their face extraordinary," he said, looking down at Leo. "But they deserve to be heard." Motion denied. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. They had survived the first punch. The next phase of the lawsuit was discovery, and it was here that GBC deployed its most effective weapon, its sheer, overwhelming size. Jessica Harding's team buried them in a mountain of paper. They sent over 50 boxes of documents, interoffice memos, marketing reports, supply chain logistics, chemical analyses, thousands upon thousands of pages, almost none of which were relevant to the recipe's origin. It was a classic corporate tactic, attrition. They aimed to exhaust their opponents, to drain their finances and their will to fight by forcing them to spend hundreds of hours sifting through useless information. Nights at the brewery transformed. After closing time, Leo and Eleanor would sit in a back room, surrounded by stacks of boxes, the air thick with the smell of paper and dust. They drank stale coffee and searched for a needle in a corporate haystack. The legal bills mounted. The second mortgage was disappearing at an alarming rate. Sarah watched from a distance, her silence a heavy blanket of disapproval. She did her job, managed the books, served the few loyal customers they had left, but a chasm had opened between them. Every time Leo had to write another check to Eleanor for paralegal fees or document processing, he could feel his sister's gaze on his back. The strain was immense, a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that followed him everywhere. "They're never going to give us the smoking gun," Eleanor said one night, rubbing her tired eyes. "We're not going to find a memo that says, 'Let's steal the Donovan recipe.' We have to find it ourselves." The focus shifted. While Eleanor handled the legal morass, Leo and Chloe became investigators. Chloe, with her knack for digging and her access to databases, was an invaluable ally. Leo provided the context, the brewing history. They decided to trace the history of Aura itself. Global Beverage Corp. had launched Aura in 1989 to massive success. But where did it come from? The official story was that it was developed in-house. But as Chloe dug into GBC's corporate history, she found a pattern. GBC had grown by acquiring smaller regional breweries and then gutting them, keeping their most successful brands and discarding the rest. She found a key acquisition from 1988, a year before Aura's launch. GBC had bought a mid-sized Pennsylvania brewery, Keystone Brewing. Keystone had been a family-owned operation for a century before it was sold. It had gone defunct shortly after the acquisition. "It's a long shot," Chloe said, pointing to her screen. "But the timing is perfect." GBC buys a historic brewery with a deep recipe archive in '88 and launches their new historic-tasting lager in '89. It's too coincidental. The lead was tenuous, but it was the only one they had. They needed to find someone from Keystone Brewing who was there during the takeover. It took weeks of searching through old employee records and making cold calls. Finally, they found him. Frank Miller, the former head brewmaster of Keystone Brewing, was living in a quiet retirement community 2 hours away. Leo and Chloe drove out to meet him. Frank was a small, frail man in his late 80s, but his eyes lit up when Leo introduced himself as a Donovan. "Donovan's Draft," Frank said, a nostalgic smile on his face. "Your grandfather taught my father a thing or two about dry hopping." Good people. Good brewers. They sat in the sterile, sunlit common room of the retirement home. At first, Frank was hesitant, his memory hazy. But as Leo prompted him with details about the GBC takeover, something clicked. "I remember the suits," Frank said, his voice a low whisper. "They came in, snooped around everywhere. The archives especially. Our brewery was old, had recipes going back to the 1800s. Did you ever see a recipe for a lager?" Leo asked, leaning forward. "By an Arthur Donovan?" Frank's eyes unfocused for a moment, searching the past. "Donovan's Donovan. I remember the name." After the suits went through the archives, there was a buzz. One of the young executives, a real shark, he was excited. He was holding this old, framed document. Said they'd found the golden goose. I heard him mention the name Donovan to his boss. They packed it up and took it back to headquarters. A year later, Aura comes out. Leo's heart was pounding. This was it. This was the link. "Frank, would you be willing to testify to that, to say that in a deposition?" The old man looked from Leo's desperate face to Chloe's poised pen. He sighed, a lifetime of caution warring with a brewer's sense of justice. "A man's recipe is his soul," he said softly. "What they did was wrong." "Oh, yes. I'll tell them what I saw. The drive back was electric. They had a witness. They had a direct link from GBC to his great-grandfather's name." For the first time, Leo felt like they could actually win. It was the story's midpoint. The tide, he believed, had finally turned. Eleanor was ecstatic. She immediately scheduled Frank Miller's deposition. It was the breakthrough they needed, a chink in GBC's armor. But GBC's intelligence network was better than they could have imagined. 2 days before the scheduled deposition, Eleanor received a call from a frantic social worker at Frank's retirement home. "2 men were here to see Mr. Miller," the social worker said. They said they were lawyers from Global Beverage. They met with him privately for an hour. Now he's terrified. He's refusing to speak to anyone." Leo and Eleanor drove back immediately. They found Frank in his room, sitting in his armchair, staring blankly at the wall. He looked smaller, diminished. "Frank, what happened?" Leo asked gently. The old man wouldn't look at them. "I can't," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They reminded me. The severance package. There was a paper I signed. An NDA. Non-disclosure. They said if I talk, they'll take my pension. Everything. My son. His medical bills. I can't lose my pension, they had gotten to him. They had found his weakness and squeezed. Jessica Harding hadn't just neutralized their star witness, she had crushed his spirit. He was of no use to them now. The elation Leo had felt just days before evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard knot of despair in his stomach. He wasn't just fighting a legal team. He was fighting a machine that was powerful enough to reach into a quiet retirement home and threaten an old man into silence. With their key witness gone, their case was back on life support. Jessica Harding knew it. A week later, a settlement offer arrived. It was, as Alina put it, an insult wrapped in legal jargon. They offered Leo a sum of money that was, in the world of corporate litigation, pocket-chained. It was just enough to cover his mounting legal fees and pay off the brewery's most pressing debts. It would save the property from foreclosure, but nothing more. There were strings attached, of course. He would have to sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, forever relinquishing any claim to the recipe and agreeing never to speak of the lawsuit or his allegations again. His family's story would be officially buried and silenced for a pittance. The offer was a strategic masterpiece of cruelty. It wasn't enough to be a victory, but it was just enough to be a temptation. It was an escape hatch from the crushing pressure of the lawsuit. Leo sat with Sarah in the brewery office, the settlement offer on the desk between them like a ticking bomb. The foreclosure notice had arrived that morning. They had 30 days. Take it, Sarah said, her voice quiet, devoid of its usual fire. She just looked tired. Leo plays. Just take the money. It's a way out. We can pay our debts. We can walk away clean. It's not clean, Sarah. It's blood money. It's them paying us to shut up. And what's the alternative? She shot back, a spark of the old frustration returning. We lose everything, the brewery, the house, Dad's savings. We lose it all for your pride. Your crusade, it's not about my pride, he yelled, standing up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. It's about what's right, it's about great-grandpa Arthur, it's about our name, a name you seem so desperate to sell off. The accusation hung in the air between them, ugly and sharp. Sarah's face crumpled, the anger replaced by a deep, aching hurt. I'm not desperate to sell it off, Leo, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm desperate to survive. I've been watching you run yourself into the ground for years, chasing this. This idea of what you think our legacy should be. But the legacy is just the two of us now. And this fight is tearing us apart. I can't watch you lose everything for a ghost. Her words hit him harder than any legal motion from Jessica Harding. She wasn't his rival, she was his terrified sister, watching her brother gamble away their entire world. The weight of his decision, of the entire lawsuit, pressed down on him. He felt utterly and completely alone. He looked at the settlement offer, a lifeline to safety, a path away from the fight. Taking it would mean relief. It would also mean that his great-grandfather's story, his family's truth, would be silenced forever. He was at his lowest point, trapped between financial ruin and the surrender of his soul. That night, Leo didn't go home. He sat alone in the cavernous silence of the brewery, the settlement offer a pale rectangle on the dark wood of the bar. He poured himself a pint of his own stout, the one beer he was still proud of, and stared at his reflection in the mirror behind the bar. A tired man with his father's worry lines etched around his eyes. He thought of Sarah's words. I can't watch you lose everything for a ghost. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was just being stubborn, prideful. The offer was a parachute. It would save the brewery, save their home. He could walk away, bruised but not broken. He pulled out his great-grandfather's journal and opened it to a random page. Arthur's cursive flowed across the paper, detailing a failed batch of beer. November 12, 1935. The yeast was no good. 100 gallons of perfectly good wort ruined. A costly mistake. But failure is just tuition paid for the lesson. The lesson here, trust your instincts. I knew the yeast smelled off. Tomorrow we brew again. Tomorrow we brew again. The simple, unwavering resolve of the words struck Leo like a bell. His great-grandfather hadn't quit. He had faced financial ruin, the Great Depression, competition from massive breweries, and he had simply shown up the next day to brew again. Taking the settlement wasn't just walking away clean. It was admitting that the recipe, the story, Arthur Donovan's legacy, had a price. And that price was just enough to cover their debts. It was allowing Marcus Thorne and Global Beverage to buy his family's soul for a bargain. He picked up his phone. Alina answered on the second ring, her voice raspy with sleep. "We're not taking it," Leo said, his own voice clear and steady for the first time in weeks. "Reject the offer, Alina. We're going to trials." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a low chuckle. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said. "Get some sleep, Leo. The real fight starts now." Chloe Martinez took the news of Frank Miller's silencing personally. She felt she had exposed him, made him a target. Her journalistic integrity stung, but more than that, she believed in Leo's fight. While Leo and Alina prepared for the trial, Chloe went back to the only lead they had, Keystone Brewing. She refused to believe that no paper trail existed. She spent days tracking down the descendants of the original owners of Keystone, the Becker family. She finally got a hold of Amelia Becker, the granddaughter of the last owner, now a retired schoolteacher living in Florida. Amelia remembered the GBC buyout vaguely. She had been in college at the time. "My grandfather was heartbroken," she told Chloe over the phone. "And it was his life's work. He kept everything. When he passed, we cleaned out his home office. Most of it was just old invoices, but we kept a few boxes of his personal correspondence. It was the longest of long shots." Chloe convinced Amelia to look. "I'm looking for anything related to the GBC acquisition," Chloe said. "Any letters, memos, anything that mentions old recipes or patents." For days, there was nothing. The trial date loomed. Leo and Alina were preparing for a case built on circumstantial evidence and the sheer audacity of their claim. They were likely going to lose. Then the night before the trial was set to begin, Chloe's phone rang. It was Amelia Becker. "I don't know if this is anything," she said, "but I found a box of letters. From after the sale. My grandfather kept in touch with one of the young executives from GBC. A man named Marcus Thorne." Chloe's heart leaped. "What do the letters say?" "Mostly just business chatter," Amelia said. "But there's one here from 1989. Thorne is thanking my grandfather for his cooperation during the transition. And then he writes, wait, let me read it to you." There was a rustling of paper. "P.S., Amelia read, "you'll be amused to know our R&D team is having tremendous success with that old pre-prohibition patent we found in your archives. The one for the lager signed by an Arthur Donovan. We think it has tremendous market potential." A real golden goose, just as I said. Chloe felt a jolt of pure adrenaline. It was the smoking gun. And the man holding it was the CEO of Global Beverage Corp himself. The trial was a brutal, grinding affair. Jessica Harding, in her opening statement, painted Leo as a pathetic figure, a man who had failed at the one thing his family had ever succeeded at and was now trying to blame a successful corporation for his own shortcomings. Alina's opening was quieter, more personal. She told the story of Arthur Donovan, an immigrant who built a business from nothing, a story of American ingenuity and family legacy. The first few days went badly for them. Without Frank Miller, all they had was the patent and the journal. Jessica Harding's cross-examination of Leo was merciless. She picked apart the brewery's finances, his lack of business experience, forcing him to admit again and again that they were on the verge of bankruptcy. She made him look like a desperate man. Marcus Thorne took the stand, the picture of corporate grace and power. He was charming, articulate, and completely believable. He spoke of GBC's cutting-edge research and development, their team of world-class brewmasters who worked for 2 years to perfect the Aura formula. He dismissed Leo's claim with a patient, almost pitying smile. Alina's cross-examination was masterful, but Thorne was prepared. He deflected every question, denied everything. Without concrete evidence linking him to the recipe, it was just Leo's word against his. And in the world of money and power, the word of a billionaire CEO carried more weight. The jury looked skeptical. Leo could feel the case and his last hope slipping away. Chloe had emailed a scanned copy of the letter to Alina late the night before. They had spent all night verifying its authenticity, preparing the legal motion to introduce new evidence. The next morning, the final day of the trial, Alina stood as Jessica Harding rested her case. "Your Honor," Alina said, her voice ringing with a newfound energy. "The plaintiff has new evidence which only came to our attention last night. We request permission to introduce it and to recall Mr. Marcus Thorne to the stand. Harding was on her feet instantly, objecting furiously. But the judge, his curiosity piqued by the dramatic turn, overruled her. I'll allow it. A copy of the letter was distributed to the judge, the jury, and to a suddenly pale Marcus Thorne. There was a murmur in the courtroom as the jury members read it. Thorne was recalled to the stand. His confident composure was gone, replaced by a rigid defensive posture. Eleanor approached him, holding her copy of the letter. Oh, Mr. Thorne, she began, her voice deceptively soft. Do you recognize this letter? It appears to be correspondence from many years ago, Thorne stammered. I don't recall the specifics. Then allow me to refresh your memory, Eleanor said, her voice hardening. She read the postscript aloud, her words echoing in the silent courtroom. P.S. You'll be amused to know our R&D team is having tremendous success with that old pre-prohibition patent we found in your archives. The one for the lager signed by an Arthur Donovan's. A real golden goose, just as I said. She looked up at him. Oh, Mr. Thorne, yesterday you testified under oath that your team developed the Aura formula from scratch. Was that the truth? Thorne's face was ashen. He looked at his lawyer, at the judge, at the jury, who were now staring at him with open hostility. He was trapped. His own words, his own youthful arrogance, had come back to condemn him. My words are being taken out of context, he said, his voice weak. Are they? Eleanor pressed. Or is it that you built your career, that your company built its flagship brand, on a stolen recipe from a man whose family you are now trying to bankrupt? Is that the context, Mr. Thorne? He didn't answer. He just stared, the image of the powerful CEO shattered, revealing the young, ambitious thief he had been 30 years earlier. The lie had finally caught up to him. In that moment, watching the man who had dismissed him as a pest crumble on the witness stand, Leo felt a profound shift within himself. The fear and self-doubt that had plagued him for years fell away, replaced by a quiet, solid sense of vindication. He had faced the giant. He had refused to break. And he had won. His internal conflict, the belief that he was a failure unworthy of his family's name, was resolved. He had proven not only to the world but to himself that he was a worthy guardian of the Donovan legacy. The climax was not just the legal victory but his own inner transformation. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The tension in the courtroom was a physical thing. Leo sat with Eleanor, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Sarah sat directly behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder. When the jury filed back in, their faces were grim, unreadable. The foreman handed a slip of paper to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. The judge read it, his expression unchanging. In the matter of Donovan versus Global Beverage Corporation, the foreman said, his voice booming in the still room, on the charge of misappropriation of trade secrets, we the jury find in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Leo Donovan. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. For a moment Leo didn't move, the words not quite registering. Then Sarah's arms were around him and he could hear her sobbing with relief. You did it, Leo, she whispered. You actually did it. He hugged her back, a wave of emotion so powerful it took his breath away. He looked over at Eleanor, who gave him a slow, triumphant wink. The verdict was a bombshell. The story was national news. Global Beverage Corp stock took a nosedive. Marcus Thorne was forced to resign in disgrace. The narrative Chloe had first written had come to its explosive conclusion. The brewery was suddenly the most famous landmark in the city. Reporters camped outside. Offers from distributors, investors, and other breweries poured. It was overwhelming. In the quiet of the brewery after the storm had passed for the day, Leo and Sarah sat at the bar. The awkwardness between them was gone, replaced by a new, profound respect. I was wrong, Sarah said, looking at him directly. I was so scared of losing what we had, I couldn't see what we could become. You were fighting for us and I just fought you. I'm so sorry, Leo. We were both scared, Leo said. But we're okay now. He looked around the old, beloved room. The question is, what do we do next? For the first time, it was a question filled with promise, not dread. 6 months later, Donovan's draft was unrecognizable. A new, humbled management team at Global Beverage had negotiated a massive settlement and a licensing agreement. Now, freshly brewed kegs and newly designed bottles were being shipped out across the country. The beer wasn't called Aura anymore. It was Donovan's 1934 Legacy Lager, and the label featured a picture of a proud-looking Arthur Donovan. The brewery itself had been restored to its former glory, a perfect blend of historic charm and modern efficiency. It was constantly busy, a hub for the community, a symbol of resilience. Leo, no longer the harried, insecure man he once was, stood at the bar leading a tour group. He was a natural storyteller now, confident and passionate. He pointed to the wall behind the bar where two frames hung side by side. One was the original 1934 patent. The other was a framed copy of the first Donovan's 1934 Legacy Lager label. "My great-grandfather had a motto," Leo told the rap tour group, raising his own glass of the golden lager. He wrote it in his journal after a particularly bad batch. "Tomorrow we brew again, it's about not giving up. It's about believing in what you do." He took a sip, the taste as familiar and satisfying as a homecoming. He had not only saved his family's brewery and reclaimed their legacy, but in the fires of the fight, he had finally forged his own. The ghosts of Donovan's draft no longer smelled of failure, they smelled of victory.